Hi, hello, I'm Louise, this is Quick Histories, and welcome to another episode. Today's episode is dedicated to all of those people on my social media who have requested and voted for a fact on this topic. And by all of those people, I do mean two of my friends who happen to be beardy men. Because yes, today's fact is about the history of beards, or rather, more specifically, why beards were banned in Russia at one point. So yeah, let's check it out. The Russian leader Peter the Great actually banned beards in 1698. Peter the Great, or Peter the First, as I guess he must have been known to people who weren't a big fan of his, ruled Russia as Tsar for over 40 years in the 17th century, and he came to power when he was only 10 years old. As his name suggests, he's remembered pretty well. He's known for modernizing Russia, opening it up to his European neighbor pals, and generally making Russia a real power in Europe. He did this by initiating huge, wide reforms in every aspect of Russian life: politics, economics, culture, religion, military, everything. So I could tell you about all these important economic reforms that he brought in, or I could tell you about the point where he decided to shave the beards off of all of his subjects. Guess which one I'm going to do. One of his reforms, one of his ways of bringing Russia into the 17th century, baby, was to demand that all Russians shaved their beards off. There were a few exceptions, such as members of the clergy, but otherwise it was off with that facial fuzz. One popular story tells us that he announced this new decree by gathering all his important people in his court and his dignitaries together, whipping out a razor and beginning to shave people himself. I do think this story needs to be taken with a pinch of salt in terms of its historical accuracy, but at the same time, it's not the weirdest story to come out of royal Russian history. But why exactly did Peter the Great decide that Russia had to be a beard-free zone? To understand that, we need some historical context. So before Peter the Great's reign, Russia wasn't very connected to Europe. It was locked away, it had little to no navy, and was generally behind the times. In comparison, the powers in Western Europe, such as England, Holland, and Spain, at this time, they were merrily sailing about the globe, exploring, trading, colonizing, setting up the slave trade. Awkward. Peter the Great wanted Russia to catch up with the rest of Europe. He wanted it to be able to compete with these Western powers. And in order to do this, in order to do this great feat of reform, he decided to take a gap year. So yes, that's right. In 1697-98, when Peter was about 25 years old, he and just, 250 of his closest friends and ambassadors went traveling around Europe in what is now called the Grand Embassy. They visited cities and towns in Western Europe, but rather than, eating street food and staying in dodgy hostels, what Peter chose to do instead was visit factories, arsenals, navy bases and schools, and even work in a few shipyards in Holland and London. There's one thing I'm dubious of. Apparently Peter went undercover on the Grand Embassy, I guess to relieve himself of any pressure of having to be the Tsar, which immediately makes me think of Peter the Great as Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday. Which then begs the question, who's Gregory Peck in all of this? Anyway, how undercover could it really be when his alias was Peter Mikhailoff, so the same first name as his actual name, and he was travelling around with 250 important Russian dignitaries? Yeah, I don't think he was fooling many people. Regardless, the Grand Embassy lasted just over a year, in which time Peter the Great soaked up all the culture, economics, industry knowledge that he could from Western Europe, and returned home to Mother Russia in order to reform it using everything he'd learnt. Among all his findings was the fact that in Western Europe, the fashion was for men to be clean-shaven, although they did often don a snazzy moustache. So Peter decided that in order to compete with the European powers, the Russians had to look like the European powers. This brings us back to the fact that in 1698, Peter decreed that all Russian men had to shave their beards, and he even gave his officials the power to shave men on the spot if they broke the rules. The thing is, yes, this sounds like a very strange fashion-related rule for a monarch to bring in, and I mean, imagine if they brought it in now. East London would be in some serious trouble. But in Russia at the time, this was about more than just fashion or style. Russia was a really beardy country, and for Orthodox Russians, the beards, they had a real religious significance. They were almost revered. And so this was a huge reform that Peter the Great was bringing in, and one that a lot of people weren't very happy with. Fortunately for them, Peter's campaign against beards waned eventually. It went from being a ban on beards to a tax on beards. Men could have beards, they just had to pay the price. once they had paid the tax, they were actually given a token in return so that they could prove to people and the authorities that their facial fuzz was legit and state approved. Over time, the decree was ignored and the tax wasn't paid, and eventually, I guess it just petered out. Peter the Great. But I guess this is because Peter the Great was far too busy reforming the whole of Russia to make sure that every single Russian man was clean shaven. And that's my beard-related history fact for you. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like this video, please help me out by sharing it, giving it a like, a thumbs up, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. That would be fantastic. And anyone who's been on city walking tours will recognise this as the slightly awkward moment that I shake the collection bucket, look at you lovingly, and ask you to help support Quick Histories by buying me a coffee on my Ko-fi page. It's a page where you can go on and you contribute a certain amount of money, the same amount as if you were just to buy me a cup of coffee or tea, and all of that goes into making more of these videos. And I want to say a big thank you to all those who have already contributed. It means a ridiculously large amount to me. Thank you so much. Otherwise, I'm off to look at all the moustaches from 17th century monarchs and rate them from best to worst. History fact.